This is probably going to seem really silly, but I'm going to make some pie today because I just got my brand new pie keeper. So it holds very, very large pies, and I'll show you that it actually holds my very largest favorite pie dish. And there it is. Oh, I love this pie dish. If you don't have an Emile Henry pie dish, you really ought to get one, because there's just something about the way that they make pottery. It just keeps the moisture in it. And every single pie that I've made using this dish just comes out perfectly. So I was very happy to see that it fit within my pie keeper, and there's room to spare. Today's recipe, the Rustic Raspberry Pie, which I am actually going to turn into a rustic peach pie, calls for oats in the crust. And actually what we're going to do is take these organic old-fashioned rolled oats and turn them into oat flour by processing them in the food processor. We'll be back in just a moment to show you what that looks like. This very closely resembles oat bran. I pick some of this up. It's flaky, there's some powderiness, and maybe it's just the nature of my food processor. It didn't get it down to oat flour. But that's okay, it'll give it some texture. So right now I'm going to take this and put it into another bowl where I'm going to mix it with the remaining dry ingredients of the crust. Well, it wouldn't be an altered plates recipe if I didn't just make some big changes, but this isn't too much of a big change, except for the fact that it's a whole grain organic pastry flour instead of all-purpose flour. So there is a different texture, and you can see the graininess to it. So I'm going to use this as the primary flour in addition to the oats that are already in the bowl. The recipe says it's optional, but I've added a tablespoon of this buttermilk powder. It's a very strange color. You probably can't tell the difference, but here's the white of the package. It's this bright yellow, almost really light lemon yellow in color. And it doesn't have any smell. There's a great recipe for buttermilk pancakes on the back that I think I'm going to try one of these days with John, because we both really like pancakes. Okay, now I've got all my dry ingredients together, and I'm going to mix them up so that they're evenly incorporated. And then I'm going to make some really big substitutions. This recipe, like most good pie crust recipes, uses butter. And I'm really trying to cut down on saturated fats in my diet, so even though I'm not going to be eating the majority of the pie, but it doesn't matter. I still want the people in my life to live healthier as well. I'm hoping that the substitution that I make with the grapeseed oil helps everybody live healthier and helps this to be a good pie crust. So grapeseed oil, just for some factual information, there we go. The factual information on grapeseed oil is that even though it has 14 grams of fat per 1 tablespoon, it's only 1 gram of saturated fat. So that's significantly less than what we'd find in butter. So we'll probably measure out about 4 ounces of that and add it to this mixture. Okay, this is where we are after 2 ounces of grapeseed oil, and it's still very, very flaky. Albeit there's some clumps that are sticking together, and the teaspoon of apple cider vinegar. So I think what I need to do is probably add another ounce of oil, and then start adding the water a teaspoon at a time until we start getting some serious clumping. This is supposed to be a double crust, and I'm thinking that it's probably going to be a very thin crust, because it doesn't really look like a huge amount of material right now, but we'll see what happens. Okay, this is what we're looking for. I actually wound up not even having to add any more water. I just added a ½ ounce more of the grapeseed oil, and ta-da! This is our crust. So next what I'm going to do is gather it into a ball and wrap it up in plastic and refrigerate it for at least a ½ hour. The peaches are still pretty much frozen, except for the 3 incredibly tasty peaches that I've decided to sacrifice to this recipe. Well, the recipe for the filling calls for 1 3/4 cups of sugar. That's just, these are so sweet. Why do you need so much sugar? Well, because the original recipe is about raspberries. So I'm going to just use a 1/2 cup of agave nectar on top of this. And then I'm going to give it a really good stir. Hopefully that'll help thaw out more of the frozen peaches. The peaches are now completely thawed, and I have added the agave nectar and a full teaspoon of cinnamon, even though the recipe calls for 1/2 teaspoon, and 6 tablespoonfuls of cornstarch. The recipe describes that as being a gelling agent. So when you cut into the pie with this much cornstarch, it won't ooze so much as it normally would with this wet consistency of peaches. Well, now the filling is ready, so I'm going to let this sit as directed and get our pie dough out of the refrigerator. Okay, now what's the story with all this butter here? Well, I tasted some of that other dough I was making for the pie crust, and it was just awful. Really, really awful. John actually suggested that I take a picture of my face, but no, it was really pretty bad. So I'm surrendering, and I'm going back to the old tried and true butter pie crust that I've used time and again, and I'm sorry, it's just going to be filled with saturated fat. I rolled out both of our dough discs, and I pressed one, actually I barely had to press one into the pan, but I rolled it out, and this is a 10-inch pie dish. It's a very deep pie dish. And all of the lovely filling of the peaches and the cornstarch and the agave nectar and the cinnamon is inside the pie. I cut out with my tiny little cutters some little leaves, so we have air holes, steam holes. Also I have a couple of little steam spaces for pie juices to come out. And now what I'm going to do is take a mixture of egg yolk and milk, brush this over the pie, probably do that to these guys and stick them on the pan, and bake it in the oven for at least 40 minutes at, what do I have it at? I have it at 400 degrees. Here we are at the 20-minute mark, and we're still very liquidy. Around the edges is getting very brown, so I added my cover for preventing burning edges. I'm going to stick it back in for another 40 minutes, and then we'll check again. Here we are at the 40-minute mark, and it is getting very, very brown. So what I did was I made a little aluminum foil tent, and I'm going to stick it on there for a little bit and let it bake for another 10 minutes and check on it. Alright, the pie is done. As you can see here, it is still bubbling. I baked it for probably a little over an hour. We're a bit brown on the ends, but we are not burnt. We're just really brown. And I used the pie shield to cover it. And then what I did was I cut out a makeshift pie shield for myself out of aluminum foil to get the center brown. So when it cools off, we'll give it a try.